Over the course of the upcoming 43 minutes, Senator JD Vance was poised to completely deconstruct Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez during a live national broadcast, relying on nothing more than a solitary piece of paper, a hushed vocal tone, and the undeniable burden of objective facts. For 9 grueling, continuous seconds, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez failed to produce even a whisper. The absolute quiet within the cavernous Senate chamber was overwhelming, bearing down heavily on the audience like an invisible physical force. Her jaw had parted twice during this agonizing time frame, moving with the flawlessly honed reflexes of a seasoned television personality, yet not a single gasp of air managed to pass through her vocal cords. The assertive, uncompromising voice that had completely ruled the pinnacle of cable news broadcasting for 8 straight years, launching countless viral internet moments and securing her a comfortable 5 terms in Congress, had suddenly and mysteriously vanished from the room. Seated directly across the glossy oak table, a United States Marine from the blue-collar town of Middletown, Ohio, quietly scrutinized her. He observed her with total calm, his eyes peering over the upper margin of a single, folded document placed squarely before him. To truly grasp how a former Lance Corporal managed to systematically dismantle the most fiercely monitored progressive politician in America, one must turn back the clock by precisely 28 minutes. We must return to the exact second Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez committed the most catastrophic strategic error a politician could make inside a Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, which was insulting the very Marine who had authored the definitive cultural text on impoverished American life. At that specific juncture, the representative was exactly 3 minutes deep into a fiery opening monologue. She looked immaculate, projecting immense power in a perfectly tailored crimson blazer. Her dark hair was intricately arranged into an immaculate French braid, a complex style that had consumed 40 minutes of her personal stylist's morning. The glaring, relentless illumination of the C-SPAN broadcasting equipment caught the spectacular sparkle of her heavy Met Gala engagement ring, scattering tiny light prisms a dozen feet across the chamber walls. The morning's official agenda was designated to explore the military recruitment crisis and why working-class Americans were no longer joining the service. The representative had been officially summoned as a distinguished guest representing the House Oversight Committee. She had leisurely perused the roster of witnesses during her tranquil train commute from New York City the previous afternoon. Looking over the names, she had identified absolutely nothing that caused her any alarm. Peering down from her heightened seat on the dais, she observed the Ohio senator positioned at the lower desk. He offered a stark visual departure from the standard Washington insider, possessing no thick, color-coordinated briefing binders. He lacked a heavy leather briefcase, a brightly lit smartphone, or frantic aides murmuring advice into his ear. He possessed only one lonely piece of paper lying flat on his desk. To her highly experienced, media-savvy perception, he appeared disastrously underprepared. She leaned assertively toward the dark foam of her microphone, projecting her signature, lecturing rhythm. She stated that she found it deeply ironic that the man aggressively marketing himself as the genuine representative of the American working class also held an elite Yale law degree, worked at an exclusive San Francisco venture capital firm making millions, and purchased a multi-million-dollar home in Cincinnati, while simultaneously dictating how the public should perceive impoverished citizens. A murmur of smug satisfaction rippled through the Democratic seats on the panel. A youthful, enthusiastic staff member sitting in the second row caught her gaze and flashed a subtle thumbs up of approval, prompting her to press her perceived advantage, completely oblivious to the snare she was walking into. She argued that the senator was not from the working class, but merely wrote about them, claiming true working-class citizens were like her, a Bronx-born daughter of struggling immigrants who survived by working double shifts as a bartender, rather than the stylized literary subjects he created for streaming platforms. What the representative did not and fundamentally could not realize was that the eerily silent man sitting at the lower desk had spent the entire prior evening barricaded inside a tiny, windowless room within the Russell Senate office building. He was joined by just one highly trusted staffer. Together, they had exhaustively analyzed 3 exact pages pulled from a recent House Ethics Committee report. They had cross-checked two obscure Federal Election Commission documents from 2019, and most crucially, Vance possessed a handwritten letter drafted on yellow legal stationery by an elderly resident of Cleveland, Ohio. He had folded that fragile yellow document 3 specific times and safely stowed it inside the interior breast pocket of his jacket. The remainder of the devastating ethical and financial information had been meticulously transcribed onto the front and back of that single, standard-sized sheet of paper in his own neat handwriting. That lone document now rested on the lower desk, directly in front of him. The representative, however, had not concluded her attack. She mockingly suggested that his military tenure was basically served as a uniformed public affairs journalist who spent 4 easy years drafting pleasant press releases in North Carolina, followed by a short Iraq deployment where his own memoir admitted he experienced no actual combat. She stressed the need for extreme precision regarding military service records in this specific context. She leaned back into her heavy leather seat, projecting absolute triumph. Standing in the dim edges of the room, her communications director nodded exactly 1 time, already conceptualizing the viral social media post. Across the aisle, the senator did not fire back immediately. He refrained from defensively adjusting his spectacles, tweaking his microphone, or repositioning his hands. His pale gaze remained firmly planted on the singular piece of paper before him. The chamber became so unnervingly silent that the audio technician in the broadcasting truck parked outside clearly registered the building's massive cooling system clicking on for the first time that day. 14 long, suffocating seconds elapsed before he finally shifted, lifting the solitary page exactly an inch off the desk before tapping it softly back down. He extended his hand and deliberately pivoted his microphone toward his mouth, thanking her for the reception. His tone was staggeringly quiet, mirroring the exact, chillingly calm cadence a veteran Marine uses when delivering news you desperately wish to avoid. He stated he served alongside 17 courageous Marines in Iraq, 2 of whom perished, and declined to discuss his own service because he intended to highlight 3 specific Marine veterans currently seated exactly 2 rows behind her chief of staff. He allowed the silence to linger for a single heartbeat. Before commencing, he noted for the official record that he had investigated Westchester County property filings that morning, revealing her childhood home in Yorktown Heights was a beautiful 3-bedroom house purchased for $250,000 in 1994, situated in a town where the median income was roughly 4 times his own family's earnings in Ohio. The arrogant smirks on the Democratic side of the room evaporated instantly, as if erased by an invisible hand. He stated that when she tells millions of viewers she is from the Bronx in the same working-class sense that he is, neither assertion is remotely true, because while her father lived in the Bronx, she was raised in wealthy Yorktown Heights, marking a massive discrepancy. A tight, humorless shadow of a smile flickered across his face. He pivoted, declaring he actually came to inquire about a different address entirely, specifically the Brooklyn business location of a highly talented black designer. Lifting his paper again, he noted this designer went unpaid for 6 brutal months, an issue the bipartisan House Ethics Committee voted on unanimously 6 weeks prior, asking if she planned to address it voluntarily. A sudden flurry of motion swept through the press gallery. 3 veteran journalists, who were actively penning flattering summaries of her opening remarks, immediately flipped to blank pages in their notebooks. A seasoned network reporter who had exhaustively covered the Congresswoman and crowned her the future of the Democratic Party over a dozen times, shakily wrote down the date and underlined it twice. The senator began reading straight from his notes, citing the unanimous bipartisan ruling from the Ethics Committee. He quoted page 17, asking if she was deeply familiar with the committee's explicit finding of impermissibly accepted gifts. She replied swiftly, utilizing the polished, rehearsed rhetoric she relied upon during cable television appearances. She claimed she publicly accepted the findings and paid the necessary remittances, stressing the committee concluded her administrative errors were neither knowing nor willful. He interrupted, his voice growing even quieter to slice through her excuses. He dismissed the legal shield of a willful defense, focusing entirely on what she actually received by violating the strict gift regulations, and prepared to list them. He outlined a massive free ticket to the Met Gala secured for her boyfriend, who was ineligible for free entry under House rules, making it an illegal $30,000 gift. He allowed the staggering sum to echo through the wood-paneled chamber. Next, he detailed a lavish, custom dress where investigators only discovered the true cost after legally compelling her team to hand over records they previously withheld, placing the fair market value around $18,000. Meeting her widened eyes, he noted she paid the struggling designer a mere $300. The press corps had ceased writing entirely, mesmerized as she nervously fidgeted with her massive engagement ring. Moving to the third item, he cited an internal email revealing her staff's plan to simply keep the designer shoes, noting the committee found severe confusion and delayed returns regarding the luxury items. He placed his notes flat on the desk. He announced that the most revealing part of the story for the 4 million Americans watching involved the designer herself. The pause that followed was so extensive, the audio engineer almost adjusted the volume before realizing it was unnecessary. In the deafening quiet, he described the designer as a brilliant black entrepreneur and founder of a pledge to direct retail space toward black-owned businesses. Representing the exact type of struggling small business owner the representative constantly claims to champion in every speech. In the shadows, her communications director stopped texting entirely, holding her phone down against her leg in panic, realizing her planned spin was useless against this unfolding crisis. He read how her elite staff aggressively pressured the designer to slash prices, resulting in significantly delayed payments to vulnerable vendors. He angrily pointed out that the working-class team providing the dress, makeup, and transport waited 6 full months for payment, which miraculously only occurred after the ethics probe commenced. With cold fury, he highlighted the sheer hypocrisy of wearing a dress boldly painted with the slogan, "To tax the rich for the flashing cameras," while forcing a black designer to wait nearly half a year for a miserable $300. This was the exact second she began frantically calculating her political survival. She had mapped out this scenario on her train ride the day before. She had reviewed it again in the green room that morning. Her logic had been incredibly simple, assuming the violations weren't willful and the negative press had already faded. The required payments had finally been made, and the matter was legally considered closed. She had built her entire aggressive posture on the false assumption that the gala issue was buried. She had disastrously forgotten that being closed in a bureaucratic report did not mean it was closed in a live Senate hearing broadcasting to millions of voters. She stammered defensively, trying to regain her footing by blaming her administrative staff and citing the committee's finding that she was totally unaware of the billing issues. The senator remained unyielding, trapping her with her own television statement where she explicitly swore she would never have allowed such a delay to happen. He emphasized her use of 3 distinct denials regarding the severe payment delay. After letting her own words trap her, he contrasted that, quote, with her lawyer's sworn letter claiming she was totally not aware of the costs and did not authorize them. He pointed out that both statements could not logically be true, as one was a carefully crafted press release and the other was sworn legal testimony, demanding the public know which one was the actual lie. He painted a brutal image of her standing triumphantly at the elite museum gala, while the designer struggled to keep her lights on. His gentle drawl made the delivery infinitely more devastating. He stated that the radical slogan was on her, but the crushing bill was on the designer. The press section sat utterly silent, with veteran reporters no longer even pretending to take notes. They simply stared as her trembling hand moved frantically between her ring and her plastic water bottle in a loop of pure panic. The senator slowly turned his single sheet of paper over to the side, densely covered in his precise handwriting. He revealed that the dress scandal was not her worst payment issue, noting an older, much more severe problem involving massive criminal exposure and potential federal prison time that was currently being investigated. Without even looking at her, he dropped the name of her former chief of staff. He described the Silicon Valley multimillionaire who comfortably bought a luxury home while taking an official government salary of exactly $80,000. Slipping into the terrifying, folksy rhythm of a seasoned lawyer preparing to walk a hostile witness off a cliff, he explained that federal rules strictly require staffers earning above a certain threshold to disclose their outside income and sprawling business interests. By deliberately capping his salary below that legal threshold, her office actively ensured he could secretly run massive political action committees and limited liability companies without ever disclosing his immense wealth to the federal government or the American people. Her voice became tight and defensive as she dismissed the compensation package as purely a matter of internal office personnel management. He interrupted her, his voice dropping into a register of pure granite. He warned that he had not even reached the specific part where she could allegedly go to federal prison. Nobody in the press section laughed at the dark humor. A senior reporter simply jotted down that he had never witnessed a senator deliver a threat that severe with such quiet intensity. The senator explained how the chief of staff established massive political action committees that heavily supported her election victory, noting she sat on the governing board and held absolute majority control, a vital fact that was never legally disclosed to the Election Commission. Turning his paper slightly, he explained that while committees must strictly itemize every single dollar according to federal campaign law, they were sitting quietly alongside completely unregulated limited liability companies. His pace picked up as he detailed how hundreds of thousands of dollars in grassroots donations were systematically transferred into those unregulated companies under the vague label of strategic consulting. Once that massive amount of money landed inside those impenetrable black boxes, federal regulators and well-meaning donors could no longer trace where their hard-earned money went. Looking up and locking eyes with her, he declared that the absolute only person on earth who could trace that missing money was the very man she actively shielded from disclosure laws by manipulating his official salary. This was the exact moment her right hand finally released the diamond engagement ring. Her trembling hand drifted slowly to her plastic water bottle, fingers closing tightly around the cap without turning it. Her hand just sat there, completely frozen, exactly how a human acts when the brain is suddenly occupied with something vastly more terrifying than a simple physical task. Her brain was desperately running a second massive political calculation. The first calculation regarding the dress scandal had violently collapsed, but this new reality was much simpler and much more lethal. It consisted of the terrifying realization that he had brought up her former chief of staff. She had not heard that specific name spoken aloud into a live microphone in 7 long years. She had comfortably assumed that bureaucratic inaction meant the dangerous matter had quietly and permanently died in the dark. Her hand did not twitch as he relentlessly continued reading. He read professional quotes from respected former election commissioners, describing the situation as a really weird scheme and a massive reporting violation of federal contribution limits. Another expert warned that if the allegations were true, she was in very big trouble for engaging in severe violations of federal campaign finance law. He specifically emphasized the legal penalty of up to 5 years in federal prison per violation. Finding her terrified eyes, he stressed that there were dozens of potential felony violations hidden inside that missing money. The network reporter in the front row was no longer trying to hide her pure shock, staring at the witness table like someone witnessing a horrific car accident they had been repeatedly assured was just a harmless parade. His voice dropped into a register of pure, icy disgust. He revealed that exactly 3 weeks after this massive criminal complaint was formally filed against her, she proudly posted a message to millions of followers. Reading directly from his sheet, he quoted her calling big money in politics a corrupt cancer that blocked universal health care and justice. He highlighted the devastating irony of her looking at the American people and calling dark money a corrupt cancer, exactly 3 weeks after a federal watchdog alleged she engineered a massive dark money laundering scheme right down the Blount hall from her desk. He set the single sheet of paper down on the desk. The first true moment of visceral, hateful tension was about to land, a fact the millions of live viewers did not know yet. With all forced politeness entirely gone, he accused her of spending highly lucrative years on television, building a massive global brand by telling struggling Americans that dark money was actively destroying their country. He stated that between the missing hundreds of thousands of dollars, the $30,000 gala ticket, and the hard-working black designer who waited agonizingly for her money, she had become exactly the kind of corrupt, elite politician she constantly told her followers to violently hate. He softly told her she was not the cure to corrupt money in politics, but the prime example of it. In the wings, her crisis manager stared blankly in horror, realizing the messaging discipline she aggressively enforced had a fatal structural flaw she had never been warned about. Slowly turning the paper back over, he declared that the dark money was only the part where she was legally corrupt, but the next part was where she was unforgivably cruel. He began reading without preamble, citing a highly publicized broadcast where she explicitly labeled the holding facilities on the southern border as concentration camps. He locked eyes with her, emphasizing her deliberate choice of words. Her political reflexes violently fired, fiercely standing by her factual statement and arguing that the academic concept of the term was broader than the death camps of the Holocaust. He cut through her academic talking points like a knife, demanding she listen to exactly who responded to her concept. He read the blistering public response from the Auschwitz Memorial Museum, the exact institution preserving the memory of over 1 million murdered human beings. He noted it was absolutely not the only response, quoting condemnations from global remembrance centers and anti-defamation groups, who stated concentration camps were a unique horror created with the specific intent to mass kill. He looked up with unrelenting fire, noting she absolutely did not retract, clarify, or apologize, but instead aggressively doubled down on national television, suggesting her critics were simply ignorant of history. While her hand remained entirely frozen, he reached inside his suit coat to produce the piece of yellow legal paper. It possessed sharp creases, like a treasured letter carried for days. He explained it was mailed by an 83-year-old constituent from Ohio named Ruth Goldfarb. Smoothing the fragile letter perfectly flat for the cameras, he explained she wrote it entirely by hand to look like letters from her late mother. Adopting the solemn, heartbroken pace of a memorial roll call, he read the agonizing letter detailing how her mother was the sole survivor of a family systematically murdered at Treblinka. The letter explained how the mother miraculously survived a transport to England at 4 years old. He slowly turned the page, reading how the 96-year-old mother, living in a nursing home with dementia, heard the representative casually compare a border fence to a concentration camp on television. The letter detailed how the mother turned her face to a bare wall, refused food and water, and died 3 weeks later, cruelly stripped of her final piece. The devastating letter concluded by asking if the engagement metrics were worth the pain caused to those terrified survivors. The room fell completely dead silent as he folded the letter. He stated he was sitting there saying it out loud today. In the very front row, an anonymous woman whose great-grandmother had been murdered at Sobibor was sobbing uncontrollably without making a single sound. The representative's left hand drifted aimlessly upward, stopping mid-air in total paralysis, as her overwhelmed brain completely forgot what it had asked her hand to do. She did not speak as he slowly picked up his notes, leaving the yellow letter resting quietly on the bench. He noted the grieving constituent was not the only person whose family's pain she selfishly used for political gain, pointing to 3 more sitting right in the room. He read a date exactly 21 days after the United States Capitol was violently attacked, an event where brave officers were brutally beaten and killed while holding the violent line for terrified politicians. With terrifying steadiness, he noted she had given dozens of highly emotional speeches, weaponizing the word insurrection in thousands of campaign emails, personally raising more than $30 million off the trauma of that terrible day. Her voice snapped back, shrill and defensive, claiming her grassroots fundraising and complex legislative voting record were entirely separate political matters. He noted he hadn't even asked a question yet before pausing. He revealed that exactly 21 days after the brutal attack, she voted against a crucial supplemental funding bill explicitly designed to pay for massive medical care for the severely injured officers and critical security upgrades. 21 days after they literally took burning spray to the face to protect her, she voted absolutely no on their medical funding. He delivered the devastating blow by noting that in that exact same week, she sent out a massive fundraising email claiming the police saved her life, raking in millions of dollars in a single week. The pause stretched so long the robotic cameras drifted aimlessly off him and swung back to focus tightly on her shocked face. He reiterated that she cynically raised millions campaigning on their bravery while simultaneously voting against billions in funding for them in the exact same week. The atmosphere violently shifted as veteran reporters deeply underlined the timeline in their notebooks. This was the explosive, unavoidable moment of rupture. The tension that had been pooling in the cavernous Senate hearing room finally detonated. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez violently pushed her heavy, mahogany-trimmed leather chair backward. The sudden screech of the chair legs scraping against the polished floorboards cut through the suffocating silence like a gunshot. She planted both of her hands firmly, almost desperately, onto the gleaming oak surface of the desk, her knuckles turning bone white under the harsh glare of the C-SPAN broadcasting lights. Her entrenched cable news instincts, honed over thousands of hours of primetime panels and viral social media broadcasts, violently woke up. Her voice, which had been paralyzed just moments before, now rose rapidly, saturated with the kind of indignant, fiery moral conviction that her millions of followers expected. She aggressively shouted into the microphone, the audio peaking slightly, declaring that she had proudly voted against the bill because the police desperately needed systemic, root and branch reform, not further dangerous militarization. She claimed absolute, unwavering solidarity with the national reform movements that had swept the country. She fiercely insisted that her massive fundraising operation was exactly how ordinary, disenfranchised Americans fought back against the toxic right-wing political machine. As a ripple of tentative, defensive applause broke out from the progressive press section, she pivoted. She declared that the brave Marines sitting behind her were not cheap, disposable campaign props for a Republican senator. They were, she insisted, struggling victims. They were victims who only joined the military because massive, bloated defense budgets had ruthlessly hollowed out the industrial core of their dying hometowns. She claimed they were suffering veterans trapped in a profoundly broken system, unable to get basic medical care because Congress preferred to write endless blank checks to defense contractors. She was not voting against the police, she cried out, her voice echoing off the marble walls. She was voting against a corrupt, morally bankrupt Congress that constantly used them. For 15 electrifying, breathless seconds, the hearing room entirely belonged to her. The air crackled with her energy. Yet, directly across the aisle, the senator did not interrupt. He did not gesture defensively. He did not shift his weight, blink rapidly, or move a single muscle. He was an absolute statue of terrifying patience. Slowly, the scattered, partisan applause from the upper dais faded, absorbed by the heavy velvet curtains and the sheer gravity of the room. When the senator finally spoke, his voice did not rise to meet her anger. It returned exactly, terrifyingly the same. It was the quiet, immovable tone of a man who had already won the war and was simply finalizing the terms of surrender. He noted with chilling precision that she had just explicitly called the United States Marines victims of capitalism. He repeated her exact, chosen words, letting them hang in the cold air so that no one could claim they were misunderstood. Without looking at her, he slowly raised his pale eyes to the chairman of the panel. With perfect deliberate formality, he requested express permission to invite 3 specific observers from the public gallery to address the committee. The chairman, sensing the historical weight of the moment, immediately granted the request. The massive, automated television cameras instantly whirred and pivoted, hunting for the movement in the third row. The first to rise was a tough, resolute Hispanic woman. She wore a crisp navy blazer over a faded, well-worn Marine Corps Veterans Association t-shirt. She navigated the narrow aisle and walked slowly to the witness microphone, her progress hindered by a highly noticeable, painful limp. It was not a casual injury. It was the rigid, mechanical gait of someone whose leg had been violently shattered and pieced back together with cold, jagged surgical steel. She leaned into the microphone, her voice steady but carrying the immense weight of survival. She introduced herself as Maria Castillo, a wounded combat veteran born in the actual Bronx, the gritty, unforgiving Bronx to exhausted, undocumented parents who had fought every day just to survive. She noted, her eyes locked forward, that she joined the military purely out of desperate necessity. She proudly stated she was awarded the Purple Heart after an explosive device tore through her patrol. Then her voice hardened. She revealed she had enthusiastically cast her vote for the representative, foolishly believing the polished politician would actually protect the working-class people of their shared borough. The betrayal in her eyes was palpable as she revealed the devastating consequence of the representative's political posturing. Castillo had lost her tiny, hard-won apartment because the representative had aggressively voted against a defense authorization bill that contained a desperately needed pay raise. During a year of brutal, suffocating inflation, that missing money was the difference between a home and the street. Because of that vote, this wounded warrior was forced to move back into the dangerous neighborhood the representative had so quickly abandoned as a child. As Castillo stepped back into the shadows, the second observer slowly took her place. He was a retired Asian American Marine, walking with the permanently damaged, rigid posture of a man who had carried unimaginably heavy burdens for a brutal living. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium. He explained, his voice tight with barely suppressed exhaustion, that his aging parents owned a struggling dry cleaning business. Despite surviving multiple combat deployments, his meager military pension was so insufficient that he was forced to drive an Uber through the exhausting weekend nights just to cover the crushing cost of raising his children in New York. The room grew unnervingly quiet as he transitioned to the true source of his grief. With rigid, profound emotion, he shared the story of his beloved grandmother. She was a woman who had brutally survived the unimaginable horrors of an actual North Korean starvation labor camp. He recounted the exact day she sat in her living room and watched the representative on television, casually and comfortably comparing border-holding facilities to concentration camps. He revealed, his voice cracking slightly, that his grandmother turned off the television in absolute, visceral horror. She had never turned it back on. He looked directly at the dais, his words landing like physical blows, telling the representative that with her careless rhetoric for social media engagement, she had violently broken something deep and fragile inside an 86-year-old survivor, something that could never be repaired. The second Marine retreated to his seat, leaving a heavy, lingering sorrow in his wake. Then, the third man slowly rose to his feet. He appeared to be a man navigating the late stages of his 30s, yet the profound, dark hollows carved beneath his eyes spoke volumes of a much older, insurmountable, and crushing grief that had seemingly aged his very soul. He stepped toward the witness microphone with a heavy, deliberate gait, clutching a worn, deeply cracked leather wallet in his trembling hands. With agonizing care, as if handling a fragile, sacred relic, he opened the wallet and gently extracted a faded, dog-eared photograph. He smoothed the creased image flat onto the polished surface of the oak table. Instantly, the automated C-SPAN broadcast cameras zoomed in, filling the television screens of millions with the image of a stunningly beautiful young woman. She was proudly wearing the pristine, immaculate dress blue uniform of the United States Marine Corps, and in her arms, she was tenderly cradling a sleeping infant. Anchored by a grief so unimaginably dense that it seemed to physically suck the oxygen right out of the cavernous hearing room, the man introduced himself as Joaquin Reyes and explained that the woman captured in the photograph was his beloved wife, Esperanza. She was, he noted with a trembling but fierce pride, a highly decorated combat veteran who had earned the Bronze Star. He recounted how, after miraculously surviving the unimaginable, chaotic horrors of a foreign war zone, she had returned to American soil, only to be immediately thrust into a cold, unforgiving, bureaucratic purgatory. He detailed the agonizing reality of her forced 14-month wait just to secure a single psychological evaluation at a bloated, severely mismanaged, and chronically underfunded veteran medical facility. Then, he delivered the fatal blow to the room's collective conscience. He revealed, into a silence so absolute and heavy that it was physically deafening, that his wife had ultimately taken her own life within the walls of their home, tragically leaving behind their innocent 6-month-old daughter. He pointed out the devastating, hypocritical timeline of that terrible summer during the exact same period when his desperate, broken wife sat completely forgotten in a bleak, hopeless VA waiting room in the Bronx. The representative was being heavily featured across national media, sobbing hysterically while clinging to a Texas chain-link fence for the flashing cameras, casually and carelessly comparing the holding facility to the horrors of Auschwitz. He noted with a bitter, crushing clarity that the National Press Corps did not bother to write a single, solitary word about his dead wife, who had bravely served 2 grueling combat deployments, yet they relentlessly, breathlessly covered the performative grief of a politician who had served absolutely zero. Sliding the cherished photograph slowly across the polished wood of the witness table, he admitted that his soul was entirely too exhausted by the sheer gravity of his grief to even muster a genuine hatred for her. Instead, he simply asked her to deeply, fundamentally consider the very next time she decided to visit a chain-link fence for a lucrative, highly publicized photo opportunity if the cameras were actually pointing at the right woman. The representative sat completely and utterly frozen in her heavy leather chair, entirely paralyzed like a sculpted statue of sudden, catastrophic defeat, placed squarely in the center of the vast, ornate Senate hearing room. She desperately, frantically tried to summon her voice. Her mouth gaped open in a panicked, silent gasp as she attempted twice more to find any sort of reliable political pivot, a rehearsed cable news talking point, or absolutely anything that could act as a defensive shield against the devastating, visceral reality of the live testimonies that had just dismantled her entire public persona. Instead of the powerful, indignantly moral rhetoric that usually flowed so effortlessly and beautifully for the adoring television cameras, her vocal cords completely seized up. They betrayed her, producing only a pathetic, choked, breathless sound that barely even registered on the highly sensitive broadcast microphone resting mere inches from her face. The famous, commanding, and uncompromising voice that had so easily and thoroughly dominated the national political discourse for 8 consecutive years was simply inexplicably gone. It had been completely annihilated by the crushing, inescapable weight of the undeniable truth sitting just feet away from her. For 9 brutal ticking seconds, the heavy, suffocating silence that blanketed the cavernous room was absolute. It was a silence born of pure shock. When Senator Vance finally broke the quiet, his voice was terrifyingly soft, acting as a velvet hammer deliberately engineered to deliver the final, lethal blow to her carefully, expensively curated public image. He reminded her, with a chilling, unwavering gentleness, that she had just moments ago explicitly called these broken, bleeding Marines victims of capitalism. He then expertly, methodically summarized the absolute total ruin of her political facade. He pointed directly to Maria Castillo, David Park, and Esperanza Reyes, declaring with quiet fury that they represented the actual, struggling, bleeding working class of America. He fiercely contrasted their brutal daily reality and quiet sacrifices with her own highly entitled, deeply selfish actions. He noted, ensuring every camera captured the disparity, that she comfortably and happily wore a $30,000 custom designer dress to an elite Manhattan museum gala while simultaneously stiffing a struggling designer. He methodically listed her profound, glaring hypocrisies, stating for the official record that she actively ran a convoluted dark money political scheme while publicly, passionately decrying dark money to her followers. He reminded the entirely silent, transfixed room that she had casually and thoughtlessly compared a standard border fence to a historic extermination camp, trivializing unimaginable horrors. He pointed out the deep, cynical cruelty of aggressively voting against critical funding for the Capitol Police, while simultaneously raising tens of millions of dollars off the back of their trauma. His devastating, inescapable verdict echoed off the high marble walls. She did not merely betray the working class that she claimed to represent. She had systematically, deliberately replaced them entirely with herself. Slowly, deliberately folding his handwritten notes on the desk before him, Vance looked directly, piercingly into her terrified, wide eyes and stated that he had one final, simple, yes or no question. He asked her, his voice dropping into a register of pure, cold accountability, if, when she safely stood 12 feet away from that Texas border fence, she was truly, deeply more concerned with the welfare of those detained children, or with the carefully framed photograph that was being taken of her. 14 agonizing, painfully slow seconds ticked by in the silent room as her utter inability to formulate a coherent answer confirmed the devastating truth. She finally managed to choke out a fragmented, defensive stammer about the framing of the question, but Vance softly, relentlessly interrupted her, stating that it was a simple yes or no and that he would wait. When she remained completely, pathetically silent, unable to meet his gaze, he quietly yielded the remainder of his speaking time. The catastrophic, world-altering aftermath of the exchange was instantaneous as the panicked chairman declared an immediate recess. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez abruptly stood up, hastily stacked her disorganized papers, and walked stiffly, silently out of the chamber, her once invincible political career fracturing and burning in real time as three separate, devastating hashtags completely dominated global social media. Within hours, Joaquin Reyes's heartbreaking video testimony surpassed 41 million views. Declining absolutely all incoming media requests from frantic journalists, Senator JD Vance quietly packed his single, meticulously handwritten sheet of paper, flew directly back to Ohio, and drove his beat-up 2007 Civic straight to his hometown of Middletown. Later that evening, sitting quietly on a porch while his sister watched the looping footage, the veteran Marine watched the familiar streetlights flicker in the dark. He sat there, silently reflecting on a profound, unshakable truth he had originally learned in Fallujah. The working class isn't just a catchy political slogan, genuine service isn't just a throwaway sentence, and the Bronx is a very real place that you actually have to go to.